I used to think our marriage was untouchable. Jenna and I had been together for 8 years, and while every couple has their ups and downs, I believed we had built something solid, something real. We had our little routines, shared dreams, and that unspoken understanding only longtime partners can share. Or so I thought. It began with subtle changes, little things I told myself weren't worth worrying about. Jenna, my vivacious, career-driven wife, had always been passionate about her job in marketing. Her frequent business trips were a necessary evil for the life we wanted. I prided myself on being supportive, holding down the fort while she traveled. But then, the trips became longer, the calls shorter, the laughter in her voice when she talked to me. It started sounding hollow. I told myself it was stress. Her industry was cutthroat, and she was chasing a big promotion. I wanted to believe that was all it was. But deep down, I could feel the space growing between us, a cold, silent chasm that stretched wider with every passing day. Then came the text messages. Jenna had always been glued to her phone, but now there was a secrecy to it. The way her screen always tilted away from me, the muted notifications, the locked bathroom doors. My stomach churned every time, but I didn't want to be that husband, the paranoid one who snooped through his wife's things. Trust was the foundation of our marriage, right? One evening, while Jenna was away on yet another trip, I decided to surprise her. I cleaned the house, cooked her favorite meal, and even bought her a small gift, a token of appreciation for all her hard work. But when I FaceTimed her to tell her about the surprise, she didn't pick up. Instead, I got a text, "Sorry, babe. Swamped with meetings. Can we talk tomorrow?" Something about the message didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the clip tone, or the fact that it came after 10 p.m. My gut whispered that there was more to the story. I wanted to ignore it, to let it slide. But I couldn't shake the feeling. So, I made a decision. A quiet, desperate one. I called Jenna's best friend, Laura, hoping for reassurance. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Do you know if Jenna's really tied up with meetings tonight?" There was a pause, a heavy, loaded pause. "I don't think so," Laura finally replied, her voice cautious. "Last I heard, she was supposed to meet some clients for dinner, but that was hours ago." My heart sank. I didn't know what to say, so I mumbled a quick thanks and hung up. That was the moment everything changed. That was when I realized the whispers of doubt weren't just in my head. They were warnings. Jenna came back 2 days later. She kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal. She unpacked her bags, shared vague stories about her trip, and curled up next to me on the couch as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't unsee the cracks. I couldn't unhear the whispers. And I knew I couldn't let it go. The next few days felt like a blur of suspicion and guilt. Jenna acted as if nothing had changed, but for me, the air in our home was heavy, suffocating. I found myself studying her every move, the way she smiled, the way she spoke. Was it different? Was she different? I knew I couldn't confront her without evidence. What would I even say? That I felt something was wrong? That a single phone call with Laura had unraveled everything I thought I knew? No, I needed more. Something tangible. That's when I remembered her laptop. Jenna had always been careful with her phone, but her work laptop was another story. She often left it on the kitchen counter, logged in, with emails open. I told myself I wouldn't dig too deep, just enough to ease my mind. So one afternoon, while Jenna was at a yoga class, I made my move. It didn't take long to find it. There, in her inbox, was an email from her coworker, Brian. The subject line read, "Last night, Redheart." My hands shook as I opened it, praying it was innocent. But the words on the screen shattered that hope. "You looked stunning last night. Can't stop thinking about you. Can't wait until the next trip. B." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The words swirled in my head, each one a nail in the coffin of our marriage. But what really broke me was the attachment, a photo. With trembling hands, I clicked it open. It was a selfie. Brian, grinning smugly, his arm draped over Jenna's shoulder. She was smiling too, her face lit with the kind of happiness I hadn't seen in years. They were in a dimly lit restaurant, wine glasses in hand, looking every bit like a couple on a romantic date. I stared at the image, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just some harmless flirtation. This was a connection, a bond. And it wasn't with me. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. I wanted to storm out, to call her and demand an explanation. But something stopped me. Confronting her now would only lead to lies and deflections. No, I needed to be smart. I needed to be strategic. That night, I pretended everything was fine. Jenna came home glowing from her yoga class, chatting about her day as if nothing was wrong. I nodded, smiled, and even laughed at her jokes, all the while feeling like a stranger in my own home. But deep inside, a plan was forming. If Jenna thought she could live a double life, then so could I. I would find the truth, piece by piece. And when the time came, I would make sure she felt every ounce of the betrayal she had inflicted on me. Because this wasn't just about her and Brian. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my power. And I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The days that followed were a balancing act, a delicate dance between pretense and investigation. I needed to keep Jenna believing everything was normal while I unraveled the truth. It wasn't easy. Every time she smiled at me, every time she touched me, it felt like poison seeping into my veins. But I played my part because I had to. I started with small things, checking her travel schedule, skimming through her texts when she left her phone unattended. The messages with Brian weren't incriminating, but they had a tone that gnawed at me. Playful, familiar. She called him B and signed off with little winking emojis that made my blood boil. Then came the excuses. Jenna started staying late at work more often, claiming she was catching up on reports. I didn't confront her. Instead, I used the time to prepare. I installed a small GPS tracker in her car, hidden under the driver's seat. It was a simple device, one I'd read about online. It would tell me where she went when she thought I wasn't looking. The first night I tracked her, I felt like a man possessed. She left the house at 8 p.m., texting me, "Don't wait up, babe. Working late with the team." My jaw tightened as I watched the app on my phone. The little dot representing her car didn't go to her office. It stopped at a small Italian restaurant across town. I waited, my fists clenched, as the dot stayed in place for nearly 2 hours. When it finally moved again, it didn't head home. Instead, it went to a hotel. My stomach twisted into knots as I stared at the screen, the reality of her betrayal sinking deeper with every mile she traveled. I couldn't follow her, not yet. I needed more than speculation. But as I sat there, alone in our darkened living room, I knew one thing for certain. The woman I thought I knew was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had no problem lying to my face while she shared moments meant for me with another man. When Jenna finally came home, it was nearly midnight. She slipped through the front door, her hair slightly disheveled, her makeup faintly smudged. She smiled at me like nothing was wrong. "Long night," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. I smiled back, forcing every muscle in my face to obey. "I bet it was," I replied, my voice steady despite the rage bubbling beneath the surface. She kissed me lightly on the cheek and went upstairs to shower. I sat on the couch, listening to the water running, thinking about the hours she had spent with Brian in that hotel. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone and began typing a message. It wasn't to Jenna. It was to Brian's wife. The message to Brian's wife, Emily, was simple. "We need to talk. It's about your husband and mine." I hesitated before hitting send, knowing that once I did, there would be no turning back. But the thought of doing nothing, of letting Jenna and Brian continue their deceit, was unbearable. I pressed send, then stared at the screen, waiting for a reply. It came faster than I expected. "Who is this? What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm Alex. My wife is Jenna. I believe your husband and her are having an affair." The dots indicating she was typing appeared, then disappeared. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, until her response finally came through. "Meet me tomorrow. Noon. Park Cafe on Birch Street." The rest of the night was a haze. Jenna climbed into bed after her shower, her body warm against mine, as if she hadn't just returned from betraying me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of woman could sleep so peacefully after destroying the man who loved her. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, my nerves on edge. Emily was easy to spot. She had the kind of striking beauty that commanded attention. She was sitting at a small table near the window, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun, her eyes scanning the room. When our eyes met, she nodded, her face unreadable. "I'm Alex," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Emily," she replied, her voice calm but sharp. "Start talking." I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her everything: Jenna's late nights, the texts I'd seen, the tracker, the hotel. Emily listened intently, her expression hardening with every word. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her hands clasped tightly around her coffee cup. "I knew it," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. "Brian's been distant for months. I just didn't want to believe it." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared betrayal hanging heavy between us. Then Emily leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "What's your plan?" I hadn't expected the question. I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But I can't let them get away with this." Emily nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Good. Because I'm not letting Brian walk away unscathed either." Her determination was infectious. We spent the next hour piecing together what we knew, filling in the gaps with speculation. By the time we parted ways, we had a plan: to gather undeniable proof of the affair and confront them together. That night, I returned home with a strange mix of emotions. The anger was still there, burning beneath the surface, but it was tempered by a sense of purpose. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was in control. Jenna noticed the change. "You seem different," she said as we sat down to dinner. I smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Just had a productive day," I replied. She didn't press further. If only she knew what I was truly preparing for. The days that followed were tense, each one a calculated move in the chess game Jenna didn't even know she was playing. Emily and I kept in constant communication, sharing updates and coordinating our plans. She was sharp and relentless, her resolve as unshakable as mine. If Brian and Jenna thought they could keep their secrets hidden, they were about to learn otherwise. Emily managed to access Brian's email. She found reservations for a weekend trip to a lakeside resort, 2 names on the booking: Brian Williams and Jenna Carter. It was scheduled for that Saturday. My blood ran cold when I saw it, but Emily's message that followed reignited my focus. "This is it. Let's make sure they regret it." I spent that Friday evening pretending everything was fine. Jenna packed a small suitcase, claiming she was heading out for a last-minute work retreat. I nodded, even helping her load the car. She kissed me goodbye, her lips brushing mine in a way that felt both intimate and hollow. Then she drove off, leaving me standing on the driveway, watching the taillights disappear into the night. The next morning, Emily and I met at a gas station near the resort. She had a pair of binoculars and a camera with a telephoto lens, the kind used for wildlife photography. I brought nothing but my phone and a simmering fury that threatened to boil over. Together, we followed the trail Jenna and Brian had so carelessly left behind. The resort was idyllic, a picture-perfect retreat nestled in the woods by a sparkling lake. Couples strolled hand-in-hand along the shoreline, their laughter carried on the breeze. It was a cruel contrast to the storm raging inside me. We parked a safe distance away, then made our way to the main building. "They're in room 204, Emily whispered, showing me the confirmation email she'd intercepted. Check-in was at 9 a.m. We staked out a spot near the room's balcony, hidden among the dense trees. It wasn't long before the first signs of betrayal came into view. Jenna stepped onto the balcony, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, wearing the same sundress I had once told her was my favorite. Brian appeared moments later, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned into him, her face tilted up toward his as they shared a kiss, one that should have been mine. Emily raised the camera, her hands steady as she captured every damning moment. I stood frozen, a mix of fury and heartbreak coursing through me. Seeing it with my own eyes was different from suspecting it. The pain was sharper, deeper, more visceral, but alongside it came a new resolve. "This is enough," Emily said, lowering the camera after a few minutes. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with the same fire I felt. "They're done." We spent the next hour gathering more evidence, photos, videos, and even a recording of their laughter drifting through the open balcony door. By the time we were done, I had everything I needed to confront Jenna and dismantle her carefully constructed lies. But as I stared at the hotel, a thought struck me. Why stop at just Jenna? Brian was just as guilty. He had invaded my marriage, my life, and I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. Emily must have seen the shift in my expression because she placed a hand on my arm. "What are you thinking?" she asked warily. "I think it's time Brian learns what it feels like to lose everything," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Starting with you." Emily's eyes widened, but then a small, knowing smile spread across her lips. "I'm in." The drive back from the resort was quiet, heavy with the weight of what we had just witnessed. Emily's grip on the steering wheel was tight, her knuckles white. I stared out the window, my mind racing. The images of Jenna and Brian together were burned into my memory, but instead of overwhelming me with despair, they ignited something else, a hunger for justice. As we neared Emily's house, I finally broke the silence. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Her lips tightened, her jaw set. "Brian deserves to know what betrayal feels like. And Jenna? She's not walking away from this unscathed either." We spent the rest of the day crafting our plan. It was simple but effective, a confrontation that would leave no room for denial. Emily would lure Brian back home early under the pretense of a family emergency. Meanwhile, I would confront Jenna. Once we had them both in the open, we'd drop the evidence like a bomb, exposing their affair for the tangled web of lies it was. By Saturday evening, everything was in place. Emily had texted Brian, "Something's wrong with the house. Come back ASAP." I texted Jenna, keeping it vague, "We need to talk when you get home. It's important." The waiting was excruciating. Every tick of the clock felt like a lifetime. I paced the living room, my hands shaking with anticipation. When Jenna finally walked through the door, her suitcase in hand, she looked surprised to see me sitting there. "Alex? What's going on?" she asked, setting her bag down. "Sit," I said, my voice sharp. Her smile faltered, but she complied, lowering herself onto the couch. "You're scaring me. What's this about?" I pulled out my phone, opening the gallery of photos and videos Emily and I had taken earlier. My hands were steady as I handed it to her. "This. Care to explain?" Her face paled as she scrolled through the images. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then the lies started. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Brian and I, he's just a friend. Those photos are out of context." "Out of context?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You kissed him, Jenna. You booked a hotel room with him. What context am I missing?" She began to cry, her tears falling freely as she reached for my hand. "Alex, please. I was confused. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I pulled my hand away, my disgust evident. Don't you dare try to downplay this. You've been lying to me for months. And you know what? I'm done." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. I stood, pacing the room as I unleashed everything I'd been holding in. "You didn't just betray me, Jenna. You betrayed our life, our trust, everything we built together. And for what? Some cheap thrill?" Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. I knew who it was. I opened the door to find Emily and Brian standing on the porch. Brian's face was a mixture of confusion and irritation, while Emily's was calm and composed. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes locking on Jenna. "Let's cut the theatrics," Emily said, holding up her own phone. "Brian, you might want to see this." She handed him her phone, and as he scrolled through the evidence, his expression darkened. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, turning to Jenna. "Exactly what it looks like," I said coldly. "Your wife and my wife, sneaking around behind our backs." The room erupted into chaos. Brian and Jenna yelled over each other, hurling accusations and excuses. Emily and I stood back, watching the destruction unfold. It was satisfying in a way, watching them squirm, watching their carefully constructed lies crumble. But this was only the beginning. The shouting between Jenna and Brian grew louder, filling the room with the raw chaos of exposed betrayal. Jenna's voice cracked as she pleaded with me, her tears streaking her face. Brian, on the other hand, turned his anger toward Emily, accusing her of airing their dirty laundry in front of strangers. "You think this is about embarrassment?" Emily snapped, her tone icy. "This is about accountability, Brian. Something you clearly lack." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching them like a storm-eyed scene coming from miles away. Jenna's cries, Brian's protests, it all blurred together. For once, I didn't feel anger or heartbreak. I felt numb. "Enough," I said sharply, cutting through the noise. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. "You two have had your fun. Now it's time to face the consequences." Brian scoffed, his bravado returning. "What are you gonna do? Divorce her? Go ahead. It's not like you have any leverage." I smirked, pulling my phone from my pocket. "That's where you're wrong." I tapped the screen, displaying a saved video, the footage Emily and I had captured earlier at the resort. I hit play, and Jenna's face filled the room, her laughter mingling with Brian's as they kissed on the balcony. Jenna gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Brian's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to Emily, who had her arms folded and her lips pressed into a grim line. "You recorded us?" Jenna whispered, her voice trembling. "Of course I did," I replied, my tone cold. "You've been lying to me for months. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Emily stepped forward, her voice steady but laced with venom. "And don't think for a second that this stays between us. Brian, your boss will be very interested to know how you've been spending your business trips." Brian's face turned ashen. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," Emily shot back. "I've got nothing to lose." The weight of her words hung in the air. Jenna slumped onto the couch, her tears falling silently now, while Brian clenched his fists, his bravado crumbling. I felt a twinge of pity for them, not enough to forgive, but enough to feel the smallest flicker of humanity. "This is where it ends," I said, my voice firm. "Jenna, you're going to move out. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. Brian, whatever fallout comes your way, you deserve it. Both of you, don't ever contact me again." Jenna sobbed openly now, her words coming out in broken fragments. "Alex, please don't do this. I made a mistake, but I love you." "No," I interrupted, my tone final. "You don't get to play the victim here. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it." Emily reached for my arm, her touch steadying. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's go." I nodded, turning away from the wreckage of what had once been my life. As we stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a cleansing wave. Emily and I stood on the porch, watching as Jenna and Brian's muffled argument continued inside. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily looked at me, her eyes filled with both determination and a hint of sadness. "Now? We rebuild. But we make sure they don't forget what they did to us." And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Not for Jenna, not for what we had lost, but for what lay ahead. Because from this point on, I wasn't just picking up the pieces. I was building something stronger. The silence of the car ride home was deafening. Emily drove, her knuckles pale against the steering wheel. I stared out the window, replaying the night's events in my mind. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned, but it left an aftertaste I couldn't quite shake, a mix of triumph and bitterness. "I thought I'd feel better," I admitted, breaking the quiet. Emily glanced at me, her expression softening. "Because you're not like them. Hurting someone, even when they deserve it, doesn't come naturally to you." I nodded, her words sinking in. She was right. Jenna's betrayal had transformed me into someone I didn't recognize, but I wasn't going to let it define me. I had lost enough already. When I got home, the emptiness of the house struck me. Jenna's absence was palpable, a gaping wound where our life together used to be. Her suitcase was gone, along with a few of her things, but she'd left plenty behind. Clothes in the closet, photos on the walls, the echoes of a life I no longer wanted. I sat on the couch, staring at the photo of us on our wedding day that hung above the fireplace. We looked so happy, so certain of our future. Now, It felt like a cruel mockery. I stood, yanked the photo off the wall, and shoved it into a closet, slamming the door shut. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and planning. I contacted a lawyer to start the divorce proceedings, determined to sever every tie that bound me to Jenna. Emily did the same with Brian. We checked in with each other often, a strange but comforting partnership born out of shared pain. Then came the fallout. Emily had sent Brian's boss the damning evidence, and it didn't take long for the repercussions to hit. Brian was suspended pending an investigation, his career hanging by a thread. Jenna, meanwhile, had reached out to me several times, begging for a chance to explain. Each message went unanswered. I didn't need explanations or apologies. I needed freedom. But Jenna wasn't done. One evening, I found her waiting outside the house. She was sitting on the front steps, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with red. "Alex, please," she said as I approached. "Just hear me out." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "What's left to say?" She stood, taking a hesitant step toward me. "I know I messed up. I made a mistake, a terrible one, but it wasn't because I stopped loving you." I laughed, a bitter sound that didn't feel like my own. "Love? You think love excuses what you did?" "No, but—" her voice cracked. "I was lost, Alex. I felt like we were drifting apart, like we were just going through the motions. And Brian, he made me feel—" "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't try to justify this. You had a choice, Jenna. You chose to lie, to betray me. You don't get to blame our marriage for that." Her shoulders sagged, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I stared at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything. But now, all I felt was a hollow ache. "There's nothing left to fix. Go home, Jenna. Whatever that means for you now." She sobbed as I walked past her, shutting the door firmly behind me. It was over, truly, finally over. As I sat in the quiet of the house, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Brian moved out. Starting over isn't easy, but it feels right." I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "Same here. One step at a time." And for the first time in weeks, I felt a small, tentative sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine, and I was ready to walk it. The days stretched into weeks. Each one felt like a small step forward and a reminder of the damage left behind. My lawyer worked quickly, ensuring the divorce would move forward without unnecessary delays. Jenna had reluctantly agreed to my terms. She knew she had no leverage. Her betrayal was laid bare, and even she couldn't deny it anymore. Emily and I kept in touch. We weren't friends in the traditional sense, but there was a shared understanding between us, a bond forged in the fire of mutual pain. She updated me on Brian's fallout. His suspension had turned into termination. His once promising career was now a cautionary tale. "You did what you had to do," Emily said during one of our calls. "Don't second-guess yourself." "I know," I replied, though part of me still wrestled with the guilt. "But it doesn't feel like a victory." "It's not about winning," she said, her voice softer. "It's about closure." She was right. But closure didn't come easy. One afternoon, I decided to tackle the remnants of Jenna's presence in the house. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her books lined the shelves. Her scent lingered in the sheets. Each item felt like a thorn, a painful reminder of the life we had built and lost. I started with the closet, pulling her dresses off the hangers and stuffing them into garbage bags. The books were next, their spines lined with titles she'd always meant to read but never had the time for. I hesitated over a small wooden box on the top shelf. It was hers, an old jewelry box she'd had since college. I opened it, expecting to find trinkets and forgotten earrings. Instead, I found letters. Dozens of them, folded neatly and tied with a ribbon. They weren't from me. The top letter was addressed to Brian. My stomach clenched as I unfolded it, the words scrawled in Jenna's familiar handwriting. "Brian, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Every time I'm with you, I feel alive in a way I haven't in years. But when I go home, the guilt crushes me. Alex doesn't deserve this. He's good to me, better than I deserve. But you make me feel something I can't explain. Jenna." I read through another letter, and then another. Each one was a knife, cutting deeper into the wound I thought had already scarred over. She had felt guilty, yes, but not enough to stop. Not enough to choose me. I packed the letters back into the box and carried it downstairs. I didn't know what to do with them. Burn them, shred them, confront her with them? I set the box on the kitchen table, staring at it as if it held the answers to questions I hadn't dared to ask. My phone buzzed. A message from Emily. How are you holding up? I didn't reply right away. Instead, I called her. I found letters, I said when she picked up. From Jenna to Brian. Emily was quiet for a moment. What do they say? Everything I already knew, and more than I wanted to. Alex, her voice was hesitant. Do you want to meet? Talk it out? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to wallow in solitude, but another part knew I couldn't do this alone. Yeah, I said finally. Let's meet. Emily suggested a small cafe downtown. When I arrived, she was already there, her eyes soft with understanding. She didn't pry, didn't press for details. She just listened as I poured out everything. The letters, the memories, the rage and sadness I couldn't shake. Closure isn't a single moment, she said when I finished. It's a process, and sometimes it's messy, but you'll get there. I wanted to believe her. Sitting across from Emily, I realized that the road to healing wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about finding something new to hold on to. Emily and I lingered at the cafe, our conversations shifting from the pain of betrayal to lighter topics. It felt strange at first, almost forced, but as the minutes turned into hours, the weight on my chest began to lift. Emily's laughter, soft and genuine, reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there was still room for something good. You know, she said, stirring her coffee, when Brian and I first got together, I thought I'd found the perfect partner. He was ambitious, charming, but I guess charm doesn't mean loyalty. I nodded, understanding her unspoken pain. It's the same with Jenna. I thought we had this unbreakable bond, but maybe I just didn't want to see the cracks. Maybe, Emily agreed, or maybe they were just good at hiding them. The conversation turned introspective. We talked about the red flags we had ignored, the excuses we had made for people who didn't deserve them. It was cathartic in a way, saying things out loud that I hadn't even admitted to myself. Do you think we'll ever trust again? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily leaned back, considering the question. I think we can, but it'll take time. And the right person. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities. I didn't know what I was feeling in that moment, but I knew I wasn't ready to dwell on it. Instead, I focused on the here and now. The warmth of the cafe, the kindness in Emily's eyes, the small but significant steps we were both taking towards something better. As the evening wore on, we decided to leave. Outside, the cool breeze was a welcome relief from the stuffy air inside. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, her breath visible in the crisp night. Thanks for meeting me, I said, shoving my hands into my pockets. I didn't realize how much I needed this. Me too, she replied with a small smile. Sometimes, talking to someone who gets it is the best medicine. We stood there for a moment, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Then, with a quick hug and a promise to stay in touch, we parted ways. The drive home felt different, lighter, like I had left some of the weight of the past behind at that cafe. When I walked into the house, the box of Jenna's letters was still on the table. I considered burning them, but something stopped me. Instead, I shoved them into a drawer and decided to deal with them later. They didn't deserve my attention tonight. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. My mind wandered, not to Jenna or Brian, but to Emily. The way she had listened without judgment, the way she had shared her own vulnerabilities, the way she had made me laugh despite everything. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life began to take on a new rhythm. The divorce process moved forward without much resistance from Jenna, and the house felt less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary. I found myself reconnecting with old hobbies, woodworking, running, even cooking. Small acts of reclaiming my life that reminded me I was more than what had happened to me. Emily and I stayed in touch. At first, it was sporadic, a text here, a phone call there. But gradually, our conversations became more frequent, more personal. She told me about her new routine, how she was focusing on her career and spending time with her family. I told her about my attempts to rebuild, to find myself again. One evening, she invited me to a gallery opening in the city. "It's nothing fancy," she said over the phone, "but it's something different, and I think you'd enjoy it." I hesitated at first. The idea of stepping into a social setting felt daunting, but something about Emily's invitation felt safe, comfortable. I agreed, and when the night came, I was glad I did. The gallery was bustling with people, the walls lined with vibrant paintings and intricate sculptures. Emily greeted me at the entrance, her smile warm and genuine. She looked radiant, her energy infectious as she led me through the exhibits. We talked about art, about life, about everything and nothing. For the first time in months, I felt like myself, unburdened, alive. When the evening ended and we parted ways, I couldn't help but smile. Emily had become a light in the darkness, and though I wasn't sure where it would lead, I was grateful for her presence. Not everything was smooth sailing. Jenna reached out again, this time with a desperate plea to meet in person. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a park, a neutral ground where I felt I could keep my guard up. She looked different, tired, worn, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. "Alex," she began, her voice shaky, "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I need you to know, I never stopped loving you." I let her words hang in the air, choosing my response carefully. "Love isn't enough, Jenna. Not when trust is gone. Not when you made me feel like a stranger in my own life." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. For everything. I hope one day you can forgive me." I didn't answer. Forgiveness felt like a distant concept, something I wasn't ready to offer. Instead, I stood, the conversation feeling finished. "Take care of yourself, Jenna." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Jenna's apology didn't fix the past, but it wasn't for me to fix. It was her burden to carry now, not mine. Emily and I continued to grow closer. We started meeting regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for a walk in the park. Our shared experiences had forged a bond, but it was the way she made me laugh, the way she challenged me to see the good in the world, that drew me in. One evening, we found ourselves sitting on a park bench, watching the sunset. "Do you ever think about what's next?" I asked, glancing at her. "All the time," she replied. "But for once, I'm not scared of it. Are you?" I thought about her question, about everything I had been through. "No," I said finally. "Not anymore." Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world fell away. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I wanted her to be part of it. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. Jenna moved out of state, and I let go of the last remnants of our shared life. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Emily and I continued to see each other, our friendship deepening into something more. It wasn't rushed or forced. It grew naturally, born from mutual respect and understanding. She was a reminder that life could be beautiful again, that love didn't have to be a source of pain. One day, as we walked through the city, she turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "Do you ever think about second chances?" "Every day," I said, smiling, "and I think I'm ready for mine." The journey wasn't perfect. There were days when the past threatened to pull me back, when the weight of betrayal felt too heavy to bear. But each day, I chose to move forward, to heal, to live. Emily and I built something new, something real. It wasn't a replacement for what I had lost, but a reminder that life didn't end with heartbreak. It was a chance to start over, to write a new story. And this time, I was determined to get it right. As we sat together one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily reached for my hand. "You know," she said softly, "I think we found something worth holding on to." I squeezed her hand, the warmth of her touch grounding me. "Yeah," I replied. "We did." The past would always be part of me, but it didn't define me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace.